Alright, so for this video, we're going to do YNW Melly. We're going to do a facial analysis, a complete facial analysis to see where he will be ranked. Alright, so his overall facial rating is a 5.2. How rare is that? That's 1 in 2.13 people, so about 1 in 2. The percentage of people is the top 47%, which is half, or pretty much around the halfway mark. His side facial score is at 26%. His front facial score is at 20%. His total facial harmony score is at 22%. His facial dimorphism, how masculinized the face is 4.5. His body fat factors is an 8.5. His miscellaneous features is an 8.5. Now the tier list: tier 1 ideal, tier 2 near ideal, tier 3 normal, tier 4 slight flaw, tier 5 flaw, tier 6 huge flaw, and tier 7 breaks harmony. Alright, so this is the overall facial assessment breakdown of something that I noticed that was a major flaw in his overall assessments. So Melly's facial convexity from the side view profile is rounded. Having a rounded shaped skull is not ideal for a perfectly harmonious face. It can be attributed to the mandible, which is the lower jaw, not being protrusive enough. He has a severe case of jaw recession, and this can be measured relative to the vertical line that would be perpendicular to the Frankfurt plane angle. So what this means is that his face from the side view angle, his facial convexity is rounded. I will explain about that later on. And he does have jaw recession, so he does have a jaw that is recessed. Now, sorry about that. Now, the rarity scores of celebrities, these are the rarity scores of celebrities so you can compare. His facial dimorphism, which is 20% of the overall facial assessment, and we going by male since he is a male. So I gave him a check on neck width, so he does have an ideal neck width. His eye aspect ratio is good. His dominant lower third is good. His brow ridge inclination is perfect, and his ramesh length is perfect as well. So he did score a 4.5 in facial dimorphism. That's where it came from. His body fat factors is an 8.5. He did gain a little bit of body fat when he went to jail, so I kind of, took it down a bit. I would have given him a 9, but I gave him an 8.5. But 8.5 is still high enough. His miscellaneous features, 15% of the overall facial assessment. And these are all the negative flaws that you might see in the face. And for him, overall, it's pretty good. The only problem is he does have a little bit of sclerosis, so that's the white part of the eye. And he does have tear troughs or eye bags around the eyes. So that's it for the miscellaneous features. Alright, so the eye aspect ratio is the first measurement, and that is to see the distance between the pupils relative to the distance between the cheekbones, and his is at 52.5. And this is a major flaw, and this is very noticeable when you're looking at a person's face. So he does have very wide set eyes relative to his cheekbones, and that is a tier 7. His facial thirds is a tier 1, and this is perfect. So he does have evenly distributed facial thirds, and he also does have a lower dominant lower third relative to his middle third. So that is perfect. His canthal tilt is a tier 2 at 4.5. Now, this is very close to the ideal, and the ideal is at least 5.2. And a canthal tilt like this is not too bad, but it's near the ideal range. So this is near to perfect of a tilt. His facial width to height ratio, so how compact is his face or his facial features, and his is at 1.7. So it's not compact, and it is because his cheekbone distance is pretty close to one another. So his cheekbones in distance is not far enough. So if he did have wider set cheekbones, this will be more within the ideal, and the ideal starts around 1.9 to 2.06, and his is at 1.7, so that deviates a little bit far from the ideal range. His jaw frontal angle is at tier 6 at 62 degrees, and 62 degrees is far from the ideal range, and this is not ideal at all. So this will be a tier 6, and a jaw that is this steep is not ideal. No matter what the ethnicity is, no matter what the gender is, this is just way too far from the ideal range, so that would not be good. And that does, yeah, that is a huge flaw. So the cheekbone height settiness, his is at a tier 3, and his is I believe around mid set. This will be considered mid set since it's around the 70th percentile. So anywhere between the 70th percentile is going to be a mid set cheekbones, and his is at 71%, so this is not too bad. His total facial height to width ratio is a tier 7 at 1.66, and he does have a very long face head. And just by looking at his head shape, you could tell that he does kind of have that a little bit of a light bulb effect, because I'm going to talk about that later, but his head does look kind of like a fish shape, I guess. Not to like make fun of him or anything like that. He does have a very long head relative to the shape of it, or relative to the length of it. And I guess this, like I said before, another flaw that I might say is, like I said, his cheekbones are not wide enough. So if he did have wider cheekbones, a lot of his measurements in his face would be perfect. But this does break harmony. His bigonial width is a tier 2 at 83%. 83% is close to the ideal range, but preferably you do want a little bit wider of a bigonial width. So you do want a wider jaw. It will be more masculinized, and it will also just look better. His chin to philtrum ratio is a tier 1 at 2.14. So the chin, so that's the one above, and the philtrum is the one above, and the chin is the one below. And ideally, you want your philtrum to be at least 1 to 2 relative to the chin, and his is ideal, and it is at 2.14. So that is between 2.5 or 2.05 to 2.55. So that is going to be perfect. His neck width is 93%, and 93% is masculinizing for a man. Preferably for a man, you do want a neck width that is at least 90% or greater, and his is 90% or greater. So that passes. His mouth to nose width ratio is a tier 1 at 1.48. So ideally, you do want your nostrils to be within your inner eye creases, and you want your mouth, or the creases of your mouth, to be within the iris of the eyes. And his mouth right here goes all the way to near almost the pupil of the eye, but his still falls within the iris of the eyes. Now he does have a pretty wide wide mouth, so maybe that's why he's able to get within this range. But either nevertheless, like, this is still perfect. His mid-face ratio is 1:1, and 1:1 isn't really bad. It's more on the feminine side, and what this means is that he has a very compact mid-face, and this is the pupil distance relative to the mid-face distance, or the eye length, or the eye line all the way down to the upper lip. So it's the eye line all the way down to the upper lip, and you want to divide that by the distance between the pupil distance. So it kind of gets confusing a bit, but you want it to be at least one or 0.93 to 1. So almost kind of like a perfect square. And his is not more like a perfect square, because his is just a little bit more compact. His eyebrow settiness, so how high set is your eyebrows? His is a tier 3 at 1.25. And 1.25 means it's around the medium to longer set eyes. So you do want to have a more closer set eyebrows. It's more dominant looking, and it's going to be more masculinizing for a man to have that. So a tier 3 isn't bad. It's still within the normal range. His eye spacing is one eye test, and this is the one eye test. And preferably you do want to have a perfect eye spacing, which he does, and this is perfect. His eye aspect ratio is 2.8. So this is at the higher end of the ideal range for a man. So he does have more on the rounder shaped eyes, but this is still perfect. And anything more than this is going to fall outside of the ideal range. His lower lip to upper lip ratio is 1.75. 1.75 is still within the ideal range. His deviation from his ipsilateral aliar angle and to his jaw frontal angle and you do not want this to be more than 15 degrees or it starts to break harmony. And his is way above that at 37 degrees, and it's because of his jaw. And if his jaw was a bit more wider, this would have been perfect. But this is a huge flaw nevertheless, and this is not good. So yeah, this does break harmony. His eyebrow tilt is a tier 1 at 8 degrees, and 8 degrees is perfectly fine for a male face. And you want to at least have 5 degrees. And if you don't have, let's say you have 0 degrees eyebrow tilt for a man, that's still okay, but it's not going to be within the ideal range. So for this one, this is perfect. His bitemporal width is a tier 5, and the reason why this is a tier 5 is he has too much forehead exposure. And yeah, so it goes from the edges of his hairline, and the edges of his hairline is just way too far apart. So that's why this is at a tier 5. So this right here is going to start to break harmony, and it's also going to give him more of that light bulb effect that I was talking about with this head shape. His lower third proportions is a tier 1 at 33%, and 33% is perfectly fine for his lower third proportions, and his lower third proportions overall is perfect as well. And I'm going to show you guys another measurement that will also prove that his lower third proportions is also perfect. His ipsilateral alier angle is 99 degrees. 99 degrees is perfectly fine, but it's not within the ideal range. Now, it's a little bit slightly off, but he does have eyes that are a little bit more wider set, and eyes that are a little bit more wider set is not going to break harmony, but it's not ideal, or it's not going to be within the ideal range. So this is going to be a tier 3, which is still within the normal range, but his eyes is more wider set, and you want your eyes to be a little bit more on the closer set. His gonial angle is a tier 4 at 130 degrees, and 130 degrees is slightly outside of the ideal range, and you want it to be at least 123 degrees to be more of a sharper gonial angle or sharper jaw in general. And this is going to be a slight flaw. His nasofrontal angle, so how protrusive is your brow region, and his is not protrusive at all at 140 degrees, and this is going to be a slight flaw. His mandibular plane angle is a tier 2 at 23 degrees, and 23 degrees isn't really bad. That's still near the ideal range. It just, you're not going to get the full points for it, but this indicates that his mandible isn't too downswung. So that tells me that if his mandible isn't too downswung, that tells me how skinny his head really is relative to the height of his face. And yeah, his mandible isn't like really downswung, because usually if you have a very thin jaw or a very narrow jaw angle, you tend to have more of a steeper mandibular plane angle. So this tells me how skinny his head really is. His ramus to mandible ratio is a tier 1 at 63%. So this is the ramus length relative to the mandible length, and you want it to be at least 59% or higher. His facial convexity from the glabella. So like I said again, 160 is too rounded. You want to have at least 168 or more, and 160 is going to be a slight flaw. This is going to break a little bit of harmony, and this also is going to tell me that it's going to also indicate that if your facial convexity is not perfect or is not within the ideal range, it's also going to affect other measurements as well. And y'all will see what I'm talking about. His submental cervical angle. So this is the submental cervical angle. If you have a high hyoid, so this is the bone that's on the upper end of your neck, and if you have a lot of fat around the chin and the jaw area, your submental cervical angle is going to be too obtuse, and his is too obtuse because of his hyoid bone that sticks out. So you want your hyoid bone to not stick out too far, and it'll make the angle more sharper. And for him, his does break harmony, and if he didn't have a high hyoid, he would have fallen within. All right, the next measurement is the nasofacial angle, and this determines whether you have a good relationship between the nose to the chin. And like I said before, he does have jaw recession, so I don't think this is going to be a good relationship, which is not at 38 degrees. And this inner angle, like I said, determines whether the nose and the chin has perfect protrusion with each other, and they do not. have perfect protrusion between each other, and this does not also take into account his facial convexity as well. But there's going to be another measurement that's going to be similar to this that also takes the facial convexity into consideration. His nasolabial angle, tier 1, perfect, 111 degrees, and this is at the higher end, and usually black people tend to be at the lower end of it, at the lower end of this measurement. So for him to be this high tells me that, maybe he might have, some Caucasian in him, maybe, I don't know, but he does have a very upturned nose. So yeah. His orbital vector is positive, so you do want your orbital vector to be, or your orbital rims to be more protrusive relative to your eyes, and his orbital rim is more protrusive, so this means that he does have a deeper set eyes. Yeah. His total facial convexity is a tier 1, and this is the total facial convexity, which includes your nasal projection, and his at 145, and this is perfect. So yeah. His mental labial angle is a tier 3. This is at the normal range at 100 degrees. Now, I think this is because his chin is a bit too protrusive, and for a guy, you don't want your chin to be this protrusive. And the angle is just too acute. So if his chin wasn't that protrusive, this would have been more on the ideal range. So yeah. His facial convexity, and this facial convexity is not facial convexity from the glabella, which is the forehead. This is going to be from the nasion. So at that nasal bridge, and his is at 155. Like I said again, his facial convexity is just too rounded overall, and this is going to be a slight flaw. His nasal projection is a tier 2, so his is at 53%, and this is close to the ideal range for a male, but preferably you want your nose to be just a tad bit more longer. So I'm actually kind of surprised that his total facial convexity was within the ideal range. Maybe it's because it kind of balanced it out a little bit, but hey. His nasal width to height ratio projection, so this is pretty much the length of the actual nose relative to his face, and it goes from the base of the nose all the way up to the eye line, or the peak of the protrusion relative to the eye line. And his is at 1.23, and 1.23 is a flaw, and that is going to be a tier 4. And you usually don't lose too many points for nasal protrusions. His rictus E line, so this is a lip measurement, and I actually use a different picture, not this picture, to determine this, but his bottom lip is actually more protrusive than his upper lip, so all of his lip measurements are going to be a flaw. So tier 3 goes from the tip of the nose down to the chin, and you want your bottom lip to be behind the line, and you want your upper lip to be more behind the line, at least twice the distance of the bottom lip. The H line, tier 3, you go from the tip of the upper lip down to the chin, and your bottom lip should barely touch that line. The S line, or the Steiner S line, goes from the middle of the nose down to the chin, and you want your top lip and bottom lip to barely touch that line. And then the burstal line goes from the subnasal, so the base of the nose or the inner crease of that nose, down to chin, and you want your upper lip to pass or be ahead of your bottom lip, and both lips should be past that line. The nasal mental angle is 126 degrees, and this is perfectly fine, and this also takes into account his facial convexity as well. And this is kind of surprising too, because this also measures the relationship between the nose and the chin. But like I said again, he does have a lot of nasal protrusion, or he doesn't really he doesn't really have that much nasal protrusion, but he doesn't have enough jaw protrusion as well, like I said again. So maybe that might be the reason why this measurement falls in the ideal range, because both of them are not really protrusive. And yeah. His gonian to mouth relationship, so you do want your gonian to be, so that the gonian is the bone that is at the intersection between both vectors or both angles, so this right here, and you want it to be below your mouth line. and this determines if you have an adequate jaw size for your face. And for him, he does. His recession relative to the Frankfurt plane angle is at a tier 4. He does have a lot of jaw recession, like you see right here, and this doesn't detract too much as y'all may or as y'all might think, but um, this is just a lot of jaw recession. Like, I rated a whole bunch of faces and I haven't seen nothing of this much. I think the last person that I rated that might have this much jaw recession maybe was Courtney Ryan. But other than that, I don't think I've seen anybody with this much jaw recession. So he does have a lot of jaw recession. And this also does affect his facial convexity because it is round as well. And he doesn't really have a protrusive brow region as well. So that also might affect why his facial convexity just a little bit too round for his face. His brow ridge inclination is 22 degrees, and 22 degrees is perfectly fine. That is at the higher end of a brow inclination, but this is still within the ideal range, so that is very masculinizing. And you don't want it to be more than 23 degrees because it's going to look too Neanderthalic or too caveman-like, and it's not going to be attractive. His nasal tip, now this is the final angle of the 44 angles that I usually measure, and I'm going to show you guys 2 more angles that will not count towards his facial attractiveness. So this nasal tip angle is 123 degrees. 123 degrees is perfectly fine of a nasal tip, and this is at the higher end, so anything more than 125 degrees for a man is going to be outside of the ideal range for a nasal tip angle, and women tend to have higher nasal tip angles because the nasal tips are a little bit more upturned. So yeah, so I'm gonna show you guys 2 more angles that do not count. So let's start with the lower lip and submental plane angle. Now this right here is pretty much a few angles put into one, so that's why it doesn't count. And this is submental cervical angle mixed in with, like, I guess you could say, the mental labial angle, because the chin and lip relationship relative to the submental angle. And if you have a little bit too much fat underneath your jaw area, this angle would be obtuse, and you don't want this angle to be obtuse, and you do not want this angle to be acute. So if it's acute, that means your bottom lip is not protrusive enough relative to your chin. And that's the reason why it doesn't count, because it's pretty much multiple measurements put into one. And yeah, but his is perfectly fine. You want to be at least within the 90 to 100. The 90 to 110 range. So anything between 90 to 110 is perfectly fine. So inferior third of the face / lower third of the facial proportions. And this is not the equal third facial proportions or anything like that. This is a little bit different. This is another way of measuring if you have equal facial thirds for your bottom portion of your third. And his is at 0.15, and preferably you want to be between 0.43 to 0.53. And his is at the upper echelon of it, but his upper portion of his lower third is has a good enough proportion relative to his bottom portion of the third. And this is pretty much like the lip measurement mixed in with the field trim to chin ratio mixed in with the lower proportion. So this is all the measurements mixed into one to determine if your lower third proportion is favorable, which his is favorable. So like I said again, if you want me to rate your face, let me know down in the description, or you can email me. I'll have my email down in the description, and I'll have my IG down in the description as well. And yeah, make sure to shoot me a DM, and within 24 to 48 hours, and I'll also give you the instructions, but within 24 to 48 hours, I'll give you your result.